Hello, and welcome to the AstroEnergy Astrology Show podcast with Astrologer Shelley Overton.
Hey, it's Shelley, and welcome to the January 18th, 2022 edition of the AstroEnergy Astrology Show. And I want to welcome you here today. We're going to kind of go over more of what's been going on in current events with a few different celebrities this week. It's going to be kind of a different tack and different take on astrology because I need to move into a different direction. And so, yes, there is current weekly astrology. And honestly, if you go to my Instagram account, whenever we have transits, I generally put up the more profound transits, like this last full moon yesterday in Cancer, and other aspects such as stelliums and particular signs, things like that. And it's Angelic Zodiac on Instagram. And it also goes to my Angelic Zodiac site on Facebook. And that way you can get all the more current events with astrology. But today we're going to go over a few different charts. We're going to go over Betty White, Sidney Poitier, and Bob Saget. We're going to go over in order of their deaths. And it was interesting. I went on, yesterday was the Betty White Challenge. And if you are not on social media, that is a hashtag Betty White Challenge that's been going on since her passing. And basically, it's an opportunity for everybody to contribute $5 to some type of animal rescue or animal charity in her name. And I thought that was a really lovely idea. I haven't had a chance yet. I will later this afternoon, but I'm pretty sure you can do it at any point, but contributing $5 in her name. So Betty White was, as we know, very long-lived. And as Venus was getting to the end degrees of Capricorn at the end of last year, actually even the past couple of years, I was thinking, wow, I wonder if she'll make it to 100. As the year went on and I saw later last year that Venus was now near Pluto, I was kind of on high alert because I knew that Venus represents women in the sign of Capricorn is long life. And then, of course, Jupiter went into Pisces, and I believe that happened the 28th, which was literally 2 days before she passed, or 3 days before she passed. And so having Jupiter in Pisces, Pisces is celebrities or people who are in the entertainment industry. And of course, Venus joined with the Sun and Mercury and Pluto. They were all clustered together in a stellium. And so that was also another indicator that something could happen. And I think I mentioned it in one of my podcasts a few weeks ago that, a celebrity female could pass. So yeah, this is somewhat of an uncomfortable subject for me, even though I have a Scorpio rising, probably more out of respect for the dead, but it is part of life. And so I'm going to address it. And just so you know, the angels are here because my nose has been itching. Okay, anyway, here we go, Betty White. So Betty White has a Leo rising, 19 degrees. She had Neptune at 15 degrees of Leo right above the horizon, which if you followed what I say about birth charts, whatever's on the horizon at the moment of birth in your birth chart were the influences of your birthday at the day you were born. And so she was born with Neptune, films and movies, and in this case, entertainment. I'm not sure if she did any movies. Oh, she did. Later in life, she did movies. That's right. She was in The Proposal with Sandra Bullock, and I know she did a few character roles later on in her life. But 19 degree Leo rising with a 15 degree Neptune in Leo retrograde right above the horizon. And so Neptune on the rising means that there is a longevity to her. Again, Neptune rules Pisces, which is the last sign of the zodiac. It is the culmination of all of the other signs. It is usually where I look to see longevity. It goes back towards the past. It seeks out vintage energy. And so there's a definite vintagey quality about her chart, having that Neptune right on the horizon. That would indicate right there that she could have a long life, but it isn't a preclusion that she would have a long life. She has Saturn in the second house of the body. So in Libra, Saturn is in Libra, which means there's some restriction for her. But it is also a life purpose. And that meant that there was a very strong connection in her mind and in her purpose to being in a partnership and being balanced. And I don't know how many of you know this. She was married to a game show host, and she got married in the 60s. And I think it was 1963. And his name was Alan Ledden, and he was the host of Password. And he and she both were on that show. She would be a frequent celebrity guest on the show. And that was her second marriage, and she really found her person in him. And he passed in 1981. So that was quite a long time ago. It was that 40 years ago. And so she lived a single woman or a widowed woman the rest of her life. And he was her person, and she just didn't want to find anyone else. And so she was single or widowed for the rest of her life. But the fact that he was her person and she really carried his energy with her is a testament to that Saturn in Libra in the second house, which is where we become a couple. She had Moon at 28 degrees Virgo in the second house. And so that can also mean that she was very comfortable being alone. She was a champion for animals, which Virgo will be. Virgo is very comfortable with small animals. And that's because Mercury rules Virgo. But having the moon in Virgo means that she's also a loner. It's a loner energy. The Hermit is the tarot card of Virgo. And so in couples, like, she found her person, and then when that was done, she just chose to stay single and stay alone. She had Mars in Scorpio at 12 degrees, which is interesting because that's where my moon is exactly. Jupiter at 18 Libra, and her Saturn was only 4 degrees off of her north node, and her Jupiter was 7 degrees off of her north node. So there was a profound life lesson around relationships for her. And then the south node for her was in Leo, or excuse me, I don't know why I translated that to Leo, Aries, probably because they're both fire signs. Yeah, her south node in Aries. And that means that she was a really strong-minded person within the marriage. She came into this life under that south node at 11 Aries, which brought in a strong male life in the life just before this one. And she also had a 9-degree Chiron in Aries, which, if you followed along, Chiron right now is at 8 degrees of Aries. So she's in a Chiron return, 3 degrees away from her south node. With the south node at 11 degrees Aries was only 2 degrees from the end of the house of death and rebirth. So having Chiron really close to the south node, but right on her natal Chiron, means that there was a drive to finish off or change. Well, it's a finishing energy, but it's also a shift to a new energy. And there are some other aspects in this chart that I find really interesting. Most of them are in the Capricorn area for when she ended up leaving this world. But let's go back down here to the bottom of the chart. She had a transit of south node at 1 degree Sagittarius. And if you follow along, and if you don't, you may know Sagittarius is a sign of travel and long distance travel and spiritual travel. So in her chart, she had the south node transiting her house of home and family in Sagittarius, which meant wanting to make a move and go somewhere new. And then the home would be new. And the moon was at 10 degrees on the day she passed, 10 degrees of Sagittarius, right next to Mars at 12 degrees Sagittarius. And the 12-degree Mars in Sagittarius was 1 degree off of moving out of that house into a new realm. And that was the house, the 5th house, which is romance and love and connection. So here I've got chills with that. So she definitely was, in a spiritual sense, looking to move along to a new realm. But we have the sun at 10 degrees of Capricorn the day she passed, and Venus was 2 degrees off of her natal Venus. So she was approaching a Venus return. Her sun is at 27 Capricorn, And Mercury was at 27 Capricorn, about to go retrograde, if I believe. I think it went retrograde on the 3rd. I've got an ephemeris up here. Let me double check that. No, my bad. It retrograded on the 14th, so it just retrograded, but it was in the shadow period. And 28 degrees of Capricorn on the 1st of January and 0 degrees on the 3rd of January, into the next sign before it retrograded. She had that Mercury exact on her sun. And so looking at this chart with Mercury on her sun, Venus return, Chiron return on her south node, this is a lot of heavy duty energy being filtered into key areas of her chart. Again, Chiron is in the last degrees of her house of death and rebirth. A lot of times we'll look at the 8th house because it's ruled by Scorpio, which is the ruler of death, but also the transmutation of energy of end of life into something new and expansive. So like the phoenix rising from the ashes. And I think that, given Betty's personality, I'd absolutely say she was a phoenix at the moment of death because, her energy is just too strong going into the next life. I'm sure there are probably still parties going on over there. Anyway, yeah, so she had Jupiter. Jupiter just went into Pisces again. Remember, it was in Pisces earlier in the year, went back into Aquarius, and then back into Pisces at the beginning of the year. So it was the 20th, 21st of December. Jupiter went back into Pisces, which again, she's got Pisces energy in her chart at 7 degrees of Uranus. And so Jupiter was in her house of marriage and partnership. I would say Jupiter going into Pisces, man, I got chills with this. I just think that she was ready to go. I think that having the Aries Chiron on New Year's Eve and then the Mars moon in Sagittarius, my guess is that she knew it was close to her time and she just didn't want to wait. I think she went out with a bang. She went out on New Year's Eve, which is a party moment. And I think she was just, I got so many chills. I think she was just ready to see her husband and ready to be done. I think she made the best of her long life and really was phenomenal in what she achieved in her lifetime with her acting career. She was in the Golden Girls. She was in Mary Tyler Moore. She had her own show, I believe in the 50s or 60s. I'm not sure which one. And she just really made Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I think was the name of that one. Or the other one. There are two that I always confuse, but they're very similar in kind of theme. But yeah, it was just an amazing storied career that she had. And if you go on Google, I don't know if I mentioned that, but I wanted to, they have this wonderful little glyph that comes up that says, see you later, friend, or something like that, with rose petals falling. If you look up Betty White on Google, that's today, the 18th, but it's just really a sweet send off. And yeah, yesterday was her birthday, and I did a little prayer for her and sent her well wishes. So anyway, I just find that Pluto hitting her sun, it was 2 degrees off her sun, literally right between her Venus and her sun. And that is a deep shift of energy and connection to the physical. Remember, Capricorn is the material world, and it can also rule the body. Looking at causes, of course, old age is definitely the obvious one. But of course, in these times, people getting Omicron or any of the COVID iterations, she had Uranus almost exact to her Mars at the midheaven. And Uranus rules the unexpected. Now, as an astrologer, it wasn't totally unexpected. And if you look at someone who's her age, it wasn't totally unexpected. But the fact that it was so close to her birthday and it was really the first of celebrity deaths in the 2 weeks following, yeah, it was kind of unexpected. But I don't think it was really uncalled for. In her case, I think she is where she needed to be and the way she needed to go. So I wish her the best, and definitely. Oh, and the last thing, Saturn at 11 degrees Aquarius in her house of health was right on her Mercury. And I kind of touched on it a little bit in past shows about how Mercury can cause accidents or health issues, but definitely having Saturn and Aquarius on your Mercury can increase the energy of unexpected events. And so I'm not totally negating that there's a possibility she actually did catch Omicron or one of the iterations, but yeah, Saturn was almost exactly square to Uranus by 1 degree, and Mercury in her chart in the sixth house of Virgo and health was exactly square to Uranus. So my guess is there's probably a chance she had that, and that may have contributed. I know she was pretty tenacious, and she probably would have gone all the way till her birthday if she could have, but I think that Omicron really came in, my guess is. And at the same time, everything happens for a reason. You know, I've suffered loss to that in my family. And so I think that it's out there. It's always going to be out there. And it's just now, how do we integrate it into our day-to-day worlds and whatever iteration comes about? But it wouldn't surprise me at all if there were that added influence for her passing based on her chart. Okay, that being said, we wish Betty the best and Godspeed, so to speak. So moving on to our next celebrity passing, we have Sidney Poitier. And Sidney Poitier, for me, was definitely a significant figure. I rank him right up there with MLK as far as someone who made huge inroads for the African American and Black community. He had a very strong presence in his life. He always had stick straight posture and just a phenomenal presence. So I watched a little brief acceptance speech, or not even acceptance speech. I think it was just an interview with him, and they were asking him some superficial questions about how does it feel to be a Black man and getting an Oscar or something like that. And he was somewhat offended by the fact that the questions were superficial in his mind, based on his skin color, and they didn't really hit to deeper meanings in life. And I think that whole persona definitely was reflected in the roles he chose and how he presented himself as a famous person in the public eye. So he was born February 20th, 1927 in Miami, Florida. And the time I got was 9:00 p.m., which was his memory, and they gave it an A rating for the astrology of how accurate it is. So I'll take that as pretty accurate. 8-degree Libra rising, which gives a certain beauty or grace to how people perceive you, which I absolutely find is true. He had Moon in Libra at 19 degrees, which if we go back up to Betty, Betty had an 18-degree Jupiter in Libra, and he had a 19-degree Moon in Libra, which is an interesting connection. And that's in his first house. So the Moon is where we feel comfortable, and definitely his chart shows a very deep connection to people who are needing the balance of diplomacy. So whether or not he was in a relationship, I think he was married for quite a long time, but he had that natural diplomacy and diplomat persona based on that Moon in the first house. He had Saturn at 7 degrees of Sagittarius at the last degree of the house of the body and the house of being in a relationship of love, of money. So Sagittarius is a sign that imparts a great connection to people of all cultures. And I think that got chills with that. That definitely helped him in his career. Now, saying I have chills, I'm also near a window and it's 62 degrees today. So that's chilly for me here in Florida, but I had to just interject that. It's kind of funny. But that was specifically for what I had said. Sagittarius Saturn in the second house means that he connects and resonates to people of all cultures or many cultures. He was really fortunate in his career, of course, and became very famous at a time of civil rights unrest in America. And interestingly, like I think about Sidney Poitier, seemingly someone of another culture, but I think he was Bahamian. His family was from the Bahamas, but he was born in America. But he always, to me, seemed like he had the presence of someone who was regal, like from England. And I know he was in the movie To Serve with Love, which was a British movie based in England. He was a teacher in England, but there was always something very graceful and elegant, but reminded me of more of a class system of England, and that kind of tiered, I have presence and I'm well educated. But his south node was at 5 degrees Capricorn in the third house of communication. So he knew how to make his words count in this life. And he also had that south node retrograde, meaning that it was in his lifetime, went back in the third house and didn't really move out of that, even though the nodes naturally go retrograde through the zodiac. That retrograde south node means that he was moving towards the past and towards that third house and not moving on to the house of home and family, which it was right on the cusp. It was 4 degrees off of the cusp of his home and family house. So he had this strong purpose of speech. And yet I want to say there were things that he even could bring into this world that maybe didn't even get heard. And I personally have Capricorn in the third house, even though we don't share the same rising. His Capricorn did fall right there. The first 9 degrees of his Capricorn fell in the third house. Right now, with all the energy going to Capricorn, I felt it very frustrating to try and get heard and trying to, the speech is really stilted when you have Capricorn in the third house, that you don't necessarily get a say. And fortunately, I think he did have that opportunity with the retrograde south node in Capricorn. On the day he died, the asteroid Vesta was at 3 degrees of Capricorn, and Vesta is meticulous. Again, I always kind of assign Vesta energy somewhat of a Virgo energy, because the Vestal Virgins, Virgo is the sign of the Virgin, and Vestal Virgins are keeper of documents. And of course, Virgo is a very big sign that associates to admin and, paperwork and being that meticulous nature. I want to say that Vesta Capricorn definitely was kind of like, hey, what are you saying? Where are you at with your mindset and with what's going on in a meticulous fashion? So, from the passing energy, it was kind of like, here are your papers, this is what we have for you. So I think from the standpoint of fate, that definitely had something to do with it, because the south node is a point of fate astrologically. Okay, so Mars was at 25 Sagittarius. So one of the indicators of the end of life or transition is Jupiter, because it is a planet of transformation and transition. That being said, it is also very expansive around spiritual growth and shift around spiritual nature, seeking higher understanding. And it is very active. It's an optimistic energy. It is the sign of considered the most fortunate planet of the zodiac and the most fortunate sign, which is Sagittarius. So Mars, the planet of action, was in Sagittarius at his passing in the third house. So he had a 17-degree Mars in Sagittarius transit and 27-degree Vesta at the end of Sagittarius in his house of communication. So that's an energy that will speak to his Chiron. Vesta trining his Chiron in Aries at 28 degrees. And he had a 27-degree Uranus in Pisces, which directly squared Vesta on the day he passed. And his Uranus was 27 in Pisces in his house of health. And he had Venus at 23 degrees Pisces and an 18-degree Mercury in Pisces. So Neptune was right between his Venus and his Mercury. And then he had a Sun at 1 degree Pisces and 7-degree Jupiter in Pisces. And of course, Jupiter was at 1 degree on his Sun. So it, transformation right there on ego. And Pisces is long life. He was, let's see, 93, 90, older than that, 95. He was old. His birthday was February 20th, 1927, and we just entered 22. So that's only 5 years, 95 years old. So again, 5 planets in Pisces, long life. Uranus, which is unexpected at the end of life. How much does that really relate to this particularly? I don't know. I think there's always that unexpected element of celebrity passings, but unless they have a prolonged illness or something. But he had a long life, and Neptune was right there, giving us the energy of, but really looking at his chart, Jupiter at 1 degree on his sun at 1 degree Pisces, and the moon was 8 degrees of Pisces right on his Jupiter at 7 degrees of Pisces. So Saturn had just gone into his house of creativity. And does that directly reflect anything about why he would die at the exact moment he did? Not necessarily. But what you do in looking at charts for any transformation, for any movement whatsoever in a chart, you'll look at transits over the cusp, change of sign, or an aspect to another planet. And in his chart, he had an inconjunct between Pluto and Saturn at that moment. It says Pluto's at 14 degrees of Cancer. And of course, there was a sun opposition to Pluto at the time he passed. And then, of course, we had the Capricorn planets were all in his house of home and family. And so if this is the case, I would say, yes, he probably passed with family around him, which is very nice for him. And then Mercury in the last degrees of home and family. So there was an element to the family of that unexpected energy of passing, like, oh, you're here and then you're gone. And I want to say it was probably a quick passing. I don't think it was prolonged based on this chart. And so, yeah, Chiron, the day he passed, was 8 degrees of Aries in, quite honestly, the last few minutes of being in his house of health. So whenever there are planets in the last degrees of a house, that's when you're really finishing up a story. So Aries, of course, is a new story. And so there's that transformation energy being early degrees, early sign, Aries at 8 degrees, but also at the end of that particular house of health and wellness and service. So in a way, if you look to his Chiron, he kind of completed his acts of service for this life based on that energy. And looking around to the other area of his chart, moving around to his 8th house, Uranus was 2 degrees into his 8th house. And I'll remind you that Uranus goes direct today. I believe today's the 18th. Might have been yesterday or today. No, it's today. So it went direct at 10:27 a.m. Eastern, which is a few hours ago, about 4 hours ago from when I'm doing this. So yeah, Uranus went direct today, and he passed 12 days before Uranus went direct, which, you could say, hey, that's, still a ways away. But quite honestly, the week before a major planet goes direct, we're definitely feeling the slowing down and then stationing of that planet. And so having that energy shift he had a transit of Saturn in his chart, which answers to Uranus. So there's definitely some strong energy there, and an inconjunct with his natal Saturn to Uranus in the 8th house, which could be an indicator. The big thing here, though, is North Node at 0 degrees Gemini, 10 minutes, retrograde right on his Mars in Taurus at 29 degrees in, let's see, it's the last decade of his 8th house, but literally 29 degrees Taurus, which rules the body, Mars, and the node's about to shift into that exact degree in his chart. So yeah, another point of transformation in a house that is indicative of a life transition and transformation. So Yeah, I would say the moon on his Jupiter and the North Node on his Mars in the 8th house had a strong influence on the moment he chose to leave. And I definitely see that as a choice, whether it's known at the time or the soul knows it. We do choose. Our opportunities are multiple in a lifetime. I think I've heard there are up to like 3 portals that you can choose to leave at throughout your life. And I think those were set up as a way for us to go, okay, I am needing a way out or a transition or transformation, but we don't have to take all of those. And so when they appear, you can choose to stay if you want. But in this case, at the point of his life where he'd experienced all he needed, I suppose, or at least his soul thought that. Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to Bob Saget. And I just had the thought that, everyone says things come in threes. And definitely, I would say that was the case in the weeks at the beginning and the first week of January. Okay, and of course, the last day of December. So Bob Saget was born May 17th, 1956, and died here in Orlando on January 12th, 22 at 4:18 p.m. at over on the other side of town at the Ritz-Carlton. He was doing a tour of comedy clubs, and I believe he had just finished a comedy club earlier in the day or the night, and talked to his wife and went back to his hotel room. And the next day they found him. And so Wednesday, the 12th in the afternoon is when he was found. But I think Tuesday, the 11th may have been the last performance he had. And he had also posted pictures with people on his Instagram and Twitter feeds. So, he was, as far as I could tell, not suspecting anything was happening or didn't indicate it. I think he even talked to his wife before that happened. So, anyway, he had a 26-degree Scorpio rising, and he had Saturn at 29 degrees of Scorpio right on the horizon, which, of course, Saturn is a restrictive energy. It is the ownership of something. It is a life purpose. And I would say, I didn't know him, and I want to qualify all of my readings that I am not a personal friend. I have no personal knowledge of any of these celebrities. I've never met any of them. And this is purely of interest to see how astrology can be shown in a chart and the effects of transits and how we can decipher that in an effort to show you how to read a chart or indicators. I think that predicting death's very touchy subject in the astrological world for professionals. And I really try to avoid that. That being said, I've had people request it, and I weigh whether or not it's the ethical thing to do given the client's concerns for whatever the situation may be. I don't just predict passings for the fun of it. That's not something that I would do. If it's requested and there may be an ill member of the family, I would look into it and say, well, are there influences? And there are always multiple influences, like I said, throughout our lives. We have transits all the time that could indicate that the energies may line up for a transition, but that doesn't mean they will. So it's fascinating to me to look back on a life where you can see a clearly defined exit point and really see in retrospect, which is how I learned astrology. I learned it through research, through looking at life events and going, oh, wow, look what happened in that life event as it relates to astrology. So it's really being done as an educational process for the people who follow along on this podcast. And if you don't, welcome. I hope you may take up astrology for what I say here, but not just the moment of passing, but also what goes on in a person's life and how we can see through, fame or multiple marriages, which are all public knowledge, what goes on in a person's chart and what goes on in their life when they're a public figure, how that may be difficult. And I know Bob Saget had a couple marriages. I know he recently got married, which is something that makes it all the more sad, his passing, because he got married in 2018. And so he was only married a few short years. And I know it was fascinating to find that his wife was 23 years younger than he was, which, the older I get, doesn't seem quite so far-fetched to have a younger spouse. But when you have a vibrant life, and I'm looking at his chart for his Jupiter at 22 Leo and his Pluto at 24 Leo. So of course, Jupiter is a very bubbly, like all the fire signs are going, and planets that rule fire signs, which Jupiter rules Sag, a fire sign. You see this energy of youthfulness and playfulness in the chart. And definitely Jupiter in his ninth house is travel, but it's also playful. And I think Leo Cancers have been known to have senses of humor and be the sign of comedians, as well as, the stage and drama and actor energy of Leo. So having Jupiter and Pluto in Leo, definitely there was a point in his life where probably Saturn triggered that combination and then moved immediately into the midheaven. And I haven't looked at when he became famous or was on Full House, it was Full House. I, for a second, thought Facts of Life, but it was Full House. That can trigger a moment in the spotlight or a life in the spotlight. And he did have a 9-degree Virgo midheaven with the moon at 7 degrees Virgo. And so he did have his fame point, which is the midheaven at 9 degrees Virgo, being triggered by the moon. And I see the moon as an indicator. So to look at his chart before he ever became famous, I would say, well, you definitely have the possibility of fame in your life with this chart. And then Jupiter joined up with Pluto is a major life change, a major transformation, and a lot of energy is given to travel in his chart and change of venue. That being said, he passed in a town that was not where he was from. So that would also appear to me to be an indicator of a transition point that indicates how one would transition, because Jupiter transformation, Pluto, the ruler of death and rebirth. So when you have those two together, that can indicate a youthful transition. It can indicate an unexpected transition or an unexpected event occurring out of town. And so, we see that as telling a greater story in his chart. He had Mercury at 8 degrees of Gemini. And let's see if so he had an opposition to the nodes because the node was at 8. Oh, that's interesting. His south node was at 8 degrees Gemini, conjunct his Mercury. And of course, Gemini is ruled by Mercury. And so there could be an accident or there could be an unexpected neurological event, like a stroke or something. And then the north node at that time was at 0 degrees of Gemini. And he had a 27-degree sun in Taurus, and the moon was exactly at 27 degrees Taurus on the day he passed, right on the horizon. So that was exactly opposite, with the horizon, that wasn't exactly by 2 degrees. It was very close to exact. Moon on his sun opposing his Saturn in Scorpio, which would also, to me, and joined with the nodes of fate, very difficult aspect in his chart for travel and for where he was at in his life. So it can indicate something going on, obviously, with the moon sun opposite Saturn. And the node of fate, I think, was really a kicker, because if he didn't have the nodes of fate right there on his own nodes and on his sun, it might have just been another transit like any other month. The moon hits that point every month. But this particular time, other factors came to play, such as Jupiter opposing his natal moon. Jupiter had just gone into Pisces, and so it was right there opposite his natal moon. And then we had Saturn on his Chiron in Aquarius. Mercury joined with Saturn. So that would also be another health aspect potentially, or neurological event. I want to say, looking at this, seems to indicate there's a potential for a stroke, even though it's a trine. Remember, I said trines are significant in finding out something going on. But Mercury in trying to the transit, his natal Mercury and trying to transiting Mercury, and also to Chiron with Saturn right between his Chiron and his Mars. That's a definite point in his chart, an indicator that something could be a stress aspect for him. Now, that being said, doesn't necessarily mean, like I said, that it's a transition point, but it does mean that there is some kind of fate or indicator of a moment in time that he will be affected strongly between his sense of self, his identity, the first house, and his Saturn, and then the other side, which is marriage and how he communicates. That being said, I would not be surprised if he tries to find a way to communicate with his wife from the other side, because Mercury and Gemini in his house of marriage, that is like, I have to get a message through. So I think that he's going to try and find ways. And the way it would be is probably electronically. So the fire alarm going off, lights flashing. I know my aunt sees the light in the wine cooler flash occasionally when she comes home, and she always sees that as a friendly hello from her husband who passed. He's in the other side of life. So yeah, and then he has Uranus, which again is that neurological, technical, and indicator in Cancer at 29 degrees in the house of death and rebirth, the Scorpio house. So that can be another strong indicator of transformation, transition. And being 29 degrees is really the culmination of an energy. So he had Scorpio, Saturn trine to Uranus at 29. They were both at 29 degrees. And the first house just over the horizon. So in many ways, his chart does indicate an early passing, just because of the signs Jupiter, Pluto in Leo indicated. But and then he had the stellium in Capricorn in his second house of the body, which I find interesting. And then, of course, when you look at a chart and you see planets just over a cusp, you want to look at that, because that going into a new cusp means that there can be an indicator of what came from the house before manifesting. So the house before is that physicality, the rooting in the body, the structure of the body. And then the next house is the transformation or the transmutation of energy with Mercury, Saturn in Aquarius. So it's not Capricorn. And I would say if it had been Capricorn just over the cusp, that may have been a shift of how we express ourselves or what we say. It could also potentially indicate a shift in the body, that, we are tired, or maybe our body has been ill, or we are in pain and we don't want to stick around. But Uranus and Aquarian energy with Saturn, Mercury, and Aquarius, that's a strong indicator that we want to move quickly to another phase. And I guess part of my difficulty with the whole idea of not touching on death in charts or in readings stems from the fact that death is a part of life. And an old way for me, because I've done a lot of research in my life trying to get comfortable with the idea of passing and transition and death, is it's part of the experience of being human. And when we pass, we are not worm food. Our knowledge, our consciousness moves into another realm. And I was just listening last night to someone who channels, and the channeled entity was saying that, and I've heard this before from other mediums and such, that when we go to the other side of life, it's much more like reality than even here. And part of the reasoning he said this, and if you want to look it up, the channelers Cryon and Lee Carroll, so you can look that up on YouTube, Kryon. He was saying that we are only using our limited dimensional faculties. So if you're in the metaphysical realm or light worker or, any of that. We only have 3 dimensions, 4. I consider time a dimension, so that would be 4 dimensions. And so it's a very limited amount of dimensions. And he said that there are hundreds of dimensions. So if you're looking at color, like say I've got, orange, red, and yellow, and that's all I can see, that's a very limited palette of what you can use to flesh out a reality. And that's kind of what the dimensions are of consciousness. And so when you're looking at the process of living and dying, yes, definitely the transition of death for the material world, for leaving people behind and not getting your dreams fulfilled, can be very tragic and gut-wrenching. And I respect that and acknowledge that. But as a seeker of understanding, expansive awareness of what is out there beyond what we have here in the material world, you can't ignore that part of a chart, because the chart is built on birth and death, coming into life. What are the experiences? And then you pass on to the next realm, and even multiple lives can be seen in a chart. So, looking at his chart, at Bob Saget's chart, he had South Node in Gemini and the House of Marriage. So multiple marriages would be indicated coming in to understand, because Gemini is a teacher and a seeker. So he wanted to teach and he wanted to learn. It's youthful, vibrant, social. He was, I got so many chills at that. I almost want to say he's around, because his energy was very enthusiastic. I can, just looking at this chart, I can really vibe into his energy with his Mars in Aquarius and his Jupiter, Pluto, and Leo. He was, I want to say, giddy. There's like a giddiness about the vibe that I feel for this man. And the Mercury in Gemini, he had to talk. He had to play with words. He had to play with people. And I know his wife and he had a lot of online social media posts over the last year. And she even posted a really beautiful the years, or the months of the year for the last 12 months. And it's kind of like a meme that goes around Instagram and TikTok, where they put January, February, March, and they go through the whole year. And she posted pictures of them together for the whole year. And it was really sweet. She did it since his passing, I believe. And so he was very open to that youthful energy, that current day social media. It didn't seem like he was intimidated by it or shied away from it at all. And I would see Mars in Aquarius as an inventor. It's a seeker of information. It's curious. And in the 3rd house in his chart, he absolutely had a seeking nature. And yeah, I mean, his legacy was that he was a super nice guy. And I know he was a little bit off color maybe at times in his comedy shows, from what I understand. And that's pretty funny. Leo, Pluto likes to play with people, and so does Aquarius. Aquarian energy, Mars and Aquarius in his chart. He liked to see reactions from what he said. So he would say things that he didn't necessarily mean or believe to get the reaction. And that's part of who he was. He really strongly believed in family too, with Venus in Cancer. Uranus in Cancer may have meant that he had a difficult time connecting or really owning a deeper family storyline. So I want to say that possibly his mother was somewhat detached, or didn't give him the deeper emotional connection that he needed. But Venus in Cancer meant that he sought women who did give him that security, that emotional bond. But he also sought intelligent women. And I find it really interesting. His wife was a social media and is a social media figure. So it's kind of not surprising with Mercury and Gemini in his House of Marriage that he would marry somebody who does social media for a living. And then he had Sun at 27 Taurus. So he could be a romantic. He did see his partner as kind of like, you're my person. And, he valued the marriage a great deal. And I know that Moon on his Sun at the 1st degrees of his House of Marriage I know his consciousness and who he is, where he is now. He's very aware of his wife's journey. And I think he'll be with her for quite a while. So anyway, that being said, I'm definitely going to miss all of these people. You know, Betty White was a part of my youth, a very strong part of my youth on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And Sidney Poitier, I think I connected to him more in my 20s. And Bob Saget, I didn't watch Full House, but I did watch America's Funniest Home Videos enough with my kids, and they just got a kick out of it. So, you know, it's my Venus and Leo is definitely a watcher of celebrity and probably a fangirl. So you're probably going to find more charts of celebrities. I tend towards doing the celebrity charts of people who have passed, so I don't interfere in their private lives. So it is not intended in any way to really take advantage of any of these celebrities. I just want to use their charts to help you learn and understand. So, anyway. Thank you for joining me this week, and we'll see you again next week. Bye. Take care. Have a good week, and stay safe. Wear your masks. COVID is everywhere. Okay. Take care. Bye. Tickle, tickle, tickle. Transition, transform. Blah, 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 blah.
Hi, this is Shelley. Thank you for joining us this week. To contact me for a private reading, go to angeliczodiac.com under the Readings tab. Background music was provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. To purchase my ebook, Learn Astrology, you can find it at angeliczodiac.com, including discounts. Be sure to check back next week and subscribe through iTunes at AstroEnergy Astrology Show.